Good to see so many faces. My name is Chris Noring. I work for Microsoft as a cloud developer advocate. And having said that, I deal with a lot of SPA frameworks. So it's really about using the right tool for the job, right? I mean, regardless of that is React, Vue, or Angular, whatever you want to use. Anyone with Knockout? Back in the days, maybe? jQuery? Yeah, we've all done that, right? How many Vue developers in this crowd? Just want to make sure you went into the right room. Yep, good. How many Next users? Or Nuxt, I mean. Okay, definitely in the right room. This is a primer on Nuxt to understand why you would use Nuxt. Few of you, or most of you, have used Vue.js, I hope. And you try to understand what's in it for me, right? Let's try to answer that question with a sales pitch, right? I'm here as a car salesman. No, I'm kidding. There are a few official libraries that you use with Vue. Vue as a core, of course, but also Vue router and state management with Vuex. All of these libraries are included in this solution. They're tried, they're tested. We also have very powerful development tools like Webpack, Babel, and PostCSS in there. And the whole idea with Nuxt is to make you enterprise ready. That sounds very pretty, right? Sales pitch, enterprise. Does that mean? Does that mean that my life is horrible? No, it means that it has an opinion about architecture. It means that whatever app that you build in Nuxt is most likely to look the same from one project to the other. That is a great promise, right? That means when you move from one project to the other, you're not going to be super surprised, or you're going to be able to onboard colleagues easily. One of the main reasons for using Nuxt is the fact that, I'm going to come to that, you got all these great features. You got view files, you got code splitting. Code splitting is super important for us, especially if we want the app to load fast. We don't want that giant bundle, but we wanted to slice it up into neat little bundles and only load those initial bundles that we actually need. I mean, if the user starts navigating here and here, we load more bundles, right? But having code splitting is super important, and I would almost say that that's a standard by today's measurements. But you can also do a lot of other nice things for your development environment, like hot module replacement, which essentially means you do a change, it's being reflected in your browser, right? You wanted to recompile and see what the end result is. HTTP 2 support, static file serving, that's probably why you're here, right? You want static file serving for a very good reason, and that's probably because the SEO is killing you. Google is really mean to you, am I right? Your very nice Vue app is not showing up on Google, and you try to find that technical solution to make that happen. I mean, this is a problem we've had since the inception of SPA frameworks. They're just dynamic, right? They're not static pages, unless, of course, you have a technical solution at hand. Let's look at the life cycle for Vue, or this is rather for a specific route. So you go to like /products or /user. What actually happens at that point? Well, you got this first initial event, the Nuxt server in it. This is where we can read from the store or put things in the store. Then we trigger middlewares, and this is where we run some custom code, whatever that is. Only you know what that is. It could be adding dynamic routes, for example. Then we have the validation step next, which essentially means that when someone navigates to a specific route, we investigate whether that route is actually valid. Imagine you have /products 11. That makes sense for product detail, but what if someone actually types /products ABC? I mean, that ABC shouldn't be in there. So this is your opportunity to invalidate a request to a certain page. It could also be that they're missing an authorization header or something else. After that, we have a step with async data and fetch. These are two different methods you could be calling and you can hook up into. The whole point is to bring in asynchronous data and make that part of your page render. So you bring the data in and you render the page. For example, you might go to a translation service that resides on some endpoint. This is your chance to bring in that data and make that part of the rendering. Yeah. Static site generation, as I said, this is, or server-side rendering. Let's talk about server-side rendering first, because, well, server-side rendering and static site generation is, well, related, but they're not actually the same thing. So what I'm saying here is that we have a server that enables us to render pages really, really quickly, and all we get on the client side is just a page for us to render, right? The whole point of that is to make that super quick, because if you do that with JIT or just-in-time compilation, that's going to take longer. So if we let the server do what it's good at, great, right? But as part of that, we can add in features to that, and that means that we can render actual pages. So that's why I'm saying they are related concepts, but they're not a one-to-one. What needs to be said here is that Nuxt can run in two different modes. It can either have the server-side rendering mode, and or it can have the UI mode, or SPA mode as it's called. If you use the SPA mode in Nuxt, that means that you're shutting out all the nice server rendering. You can actually have that as well. But if you go with default, that means you will have UI rendering and server-side rendering as well. So when I'm saying UI rendering, that's just, well, normal rendering, if you will. Right. So how does it work? Well, it works with conventions, and conventions means that we create directories that's called a certain name, and we place our components in those directories. So in this case, if we have a project structure, that means creating a directory called pages. Now everything that goes in here is going to be transformed. What we put in here are Vue components. So for each and every component that we place in here, when we run the command nuxt generate, it will look into that pages directory and will take each and every component and turn that into HTML. As you can see here on the right. If we create an about component and an index component, we end up with the structure looking like so. That also means that we have route, slash about, and also slash, which is default route, but we could also type the long qualified route, which is slash about slash index HTML, if we want to be real specific. So that's really how that works, by convention. So pages directory, place components in there. Make sense? Great. There are two ways to create Nuxt applications. Which one you want to use is really up to you. I mean, I don't know how much you want to configure, but one of the ways is with the, as I call it, batteries included approach, which uses a executable called create-nuxt-app. You could also be using this manually. So with the batteries included one on the left, this will trigger a wizard, and this wizard will take you through selection of server-side frameworks, because guess what? There's more than one. It's the default Nuxt one, Express, and a lot of other ones. Then we have a step where you are allowed to choose UI library, and guess what? There's more than one. Well, I think you get the idea how this works. So you're going to get a lot of nice questions of things that you would want to include in your project, like testing frameworks, going with universal mode or SPA mode, or whether to use Axios or Fetch if you're really brave. And also if you want to use ESLint or Prettier to make sure that your JavaScript looks good. You all use some kind of linting, I hope, right? Yes? Oh man. It's okay. All right, so the manual approach is as simple as installing Nuxt with yarn or npm, and you add your Nuxt command to package.json, and off you go. That's literally all you get. So you need to kind of know Nuxt to understand what directories you need to create to make, well, use of all the nice features. This is us using the batteries included approach. So imagine at this point I have run the create-nuxt executable, and I've selected all of those options, and suddenly, are you able to see this font? Somewhat? Yeah, okay. So I've run my create-nuxt-app, and suddenly, boom, I get this project structure, right? This is everything that you could possibly do with Nuxt, but it gives you a lot of things. I will go into detail on all these different directories. I just want to show you what the full image looks like. So you get an assets directory, which is for images and style sheets. You also get a components directory, which is for globally shared components within your app. You get the layouts, you get middleware. Middleware is for custom code that can run in different steps in the lifecycle. Pages, we've covered that one. Plugins, you can extend Nuxt functionality if you want. Static, this is where you have static files, text files, other types of files. Store, believe it or not, well, I said this initially, but the Vuex store is definitely part of this. And of course, test. We test, right? Well, it has actually set up Jest for us, so that's pretty easy. You just need to add your tests in there and they will be found. You're a bit tired this morning, I think, right? What you have before this? No coffee, right? No? All right, so this is the simple or painful scenario, depending on how we want to look at it. We don't get any help from some nice wizard generating a bunch of stuff for us, but this is how we start. So we start by creating some kind of directory name, call it app, call it hello, whatever you want to call it. You have a directory at this point. Next thing you do is to go into package.json and register this script. We call it dev, but the whole idea is to be able to run our app with a simple npm run dev, right? After that, we need to install Nuxt itself from either yarn or npm. And then we, of course, create our pages directory, because that's really where our mindset is. This is where we start, right? Very blank app, get that pages directory created, and put something in there. So in this case, we create this index.vue component, and yeah, we basically have a hello world app. After this, we run npm run dev because we have set it up in package.json, and we have a hello Nuxt. So this is a very, very, very small implementation of, well, when you're using Nuxt. That's not a lot to look at, right? Okay. So SSR, I've mentioned this a little bit already, but I just wanted to show you what this looks like, and when you keep on adding stuff to it. We have our pages directory in our project, and we elect to create this products.vue component. So we keep on adding components in that directory. And of course, with that component, we add something in it. In this case, it's just a static text, but you know, it's a full-fledged Vue component. So you could definitely have the JavaScript styling, whatever else you want in that component. And then we add another command to package.json, which is the Nuxt generate. And every time we run this, it will actively take our Vue component, turn that into HTML. And it will first off create this directory and everything else in there. So you could just serve it up, you know, like you would static files. So we run npm run generate when we want to, and just place that on whatever hosting machine that we have, if it's in our basement or in someone's cloud. Once we run the Nuxt generate, we get a structure just like this with a dist folder and the underscore Nuxt. And I haven't opened underscore Nuxt, but one of the things it will contain is, for example, a router specification, right? Because it's doing routing by convention, by us creating this pages directory. So if you remember creating a normal Vue app, you normally need to set up a bunch of routes, and that becomes really tedious and boring, even if you just do it once, right? You with me so far? Great. Images, right? Assets. By convention again, so we have an assets directory. So next to our pages directory, we now have an assets directory, and we place our assets in there, for example, an image file. And to be able to get that file, to refer to that file in the template, we need to use this wave character, right? Anyone knows what that's called, so I'll sound less stupid? Yes? Tilde, thank you. Tilde. I need to write that on my hand or something. Anyway, tilde symbol enables us to talk to the assets directory and said, I want to show this file. That's what you see on your bottom left. Now, if I don't refer to it in the template that way, I might want to refer to it in code, in which case I need to do like a require instead, if I want to make that part of the data inside of the component. So that's how you would solve that instead. there are not only images that you can place in assets, but also style sheets. And that could be CSS, less Sass. Of course, if you want to go with less or Sass, then you actually need supporting libraries to make those work. In this case, I've mentioned the needed libraries for Sass, which is Node Sass and Sass Loader. So just do a little npm install. You will have support, and you're almost there, almost. You also need to create this configuration file that you create in your project root called the Nuxt.js, and you need to start pointing out where those assets can be found. So npm install, point out where they can be found, and then we can go back to our component and say, here on our top right, I actually have some Sass that I want to style my component with, and yeah, everybody's happy. That's not a lot, right? We just need to remember this one, or nothing will work.
Can we have
more than one endpoint? Yeah, I will actually come to the routing part here. Here, good timing. So you're talking about general. Sorry, with endpoint. Just need to clarify what you mean.
No, I'm talking about endpoint of CSS. Like, can I have more than one?
I believe you can have some kind of star, so it can matches multiple as well. I just need to find exactly how that's done, but I do remember that should be possible. I don't think you need to have a whole dictionary of, a list of Sass files. It's just important to remember that we do need to point them out somehow. But yeah, definitely believe wildcard is supported. Yeah, let's talk a bit more about routing, right? So far we've been talking about having a pages directory, placing components in there, and magic happens, right? But there is actually some kind of logic to the magic. So if we create, for example, a component called underscore, that means it's more of a dynamic routing, right? So instead of calling it products view, we call it underscore ID. That's the same thing as saying we're going to have a route that says product/111, for example. So that means we get the param after. So it actually matters there on the left, how we create it, in what hierarchy. To be added to this, I want to say that you can definitely validate your routes, because as I said, right now, we are allowing for numbers as well as, well, characters, right? And that's not good. Because most likely we're going to have a product ID that's a number or a very specific structure. And if someone tries to enter something else in there, well, you don't want to allow it, right? So for that reason, we have this hook in our component. This is our product detail component, and it can say, this doesn't look right to me because you're not a number, so I'm not going to allow this. So what you want from this one is to return true or false. If it's true, it's going to render the route. If it's false, then don't render. Then you get sent to a 404 page. And yeah, I mean, you can test a lot of things here. You can test the header of the navigation, a lot of other things, because this might be a page that you're not allowed to watch unless you're admin, for example, right? Right. How many have a blog? How many knows what a slug is? It's not the thing that goes on the ground that's really slimy, but yeah. Sorry. So the idea of the slug is to be fully dynamic, right? So when you type default route, which is slash, that's one thing, but you want it to be able to do like /abc, /123, /my Docker article, whatever, right? It's fully dynamic. And the way to do that is to just like we did with products and the underscore ID, we just have something that's called underscore at the root of pages. So in this case, we call it underscore slug and then index view. What we do need to remember, though, is that the param that's being passed can be anything. So we need to be very careful with validating whatever comes in here. In this case, I've just shown you how you can use actually a very nice hook here called async data. Now, this one has the ability to grab data from somewhere. Could be an endpoint, could be locally on your machine, and that's part of your page rendering. We have defined this getData method, and as you can see, we are returning a promise that we are resolving just to mimic the whole async process. It actually waits for this to finish before the page is rendered. So that's how you would be using the slug. But yeah, again, make sure that that slug is properly validated, right? Because if you tell people you can type whatever you want in that route, it's dangerous. Right, layouts. Layouts are nice, right? If we have a good layout system, we're more likely to use this product. Am I right? So I've identified 3 different types of layouts that I think make sense to us. One is the default route for every single page. Another one is the error page, where we want to show 500, 400 errors. What kind of errors? So we want a nice little error page so our user don't hate us, right? And of course, we might also need custom layouts for specific pages. We need to support all these 3 scenarios. So how? Convention again, a layouts directory. If we create a layouts directory and we name our components in there very consciously, that means that they mean something. So in this case, we have created an override to the default layout and call it simply default.view. Looking at it here, this is a very reasonable default page because normally inside of a main page you'd see some kind of header that allows you to navigate in the app and some kind of dynamic area which is being replaced as you click on different links. So we have the home page and we got the products as those 2 different navigation links, but we also have this dynamic area down there that's called Nuxt. Don't forget the Nuxt or nothing will work, right? So that small part there is the dynamic part. Right, error page. That's as simple as naming the component file error. So error.view means here we have an error page, we want it to handle all kinds of errors. And we need to specify so it gets a props, an input property inside of the component because it will be passed inside of our component. Now the great part here is if you look at the top, you can see that we can investigate what status code that is and render an appropriate response depending on you messed up as a client or we messed up on the back end, right? Depending on what error code comes back. So it's very configurable. Custom layout is very, very simple. It kind of looks like the default layout. It's just that we need to actively tell people or components to use this layout. In the case of the one called default layout, it's being used automatically if we do nothing. In this case, we create something that looks like default layout. It has the same idea, some kind of static text, and us rendering, let's see here, Nuxt, right? So, I mean, as I said, as long as we have this Nuxt part, that means we are rendering dynamic data. Everything else around it is static. And to actively use it inside of another component, a page component, we would just say layout blog, right? So it's just going to go and try to match the name of that layout and say, okay, I know what layout you actually mean. Make sense? Great. There are some lifecycle methods. It's too short of a talk to mention them all, but I mentioned one of the important ones, which are async data, the one that enables you to bring in asynchronous data, makes that part of page rendering. You also have a lifecycle method called fetch, and also a middleware that you could be using inside of your store. And that's really all I'm going to say to not make this talk another half hour, which we don't have. Just want to make you comfortable with the idea. So this is me rounding up the talk. So let's do a quick summary of everything we've learned, because you've been bombarded with good information, I hope. So we have talked about what Nuxt is, what to use it for, the fact that it's enterprisey, it brings stability, it brings opinion. One project hopefully looks like another Nuxt project. We've shown you static site generation. Was that the main reason why you're thinking about Nuxt, or? No, you don't know why you're here. Okay, got it. There are 2 different ways to create Nuxt applications, either the manual one or the one that gives you a wizard, the one that I showed you. Which one you want to use is really up to you. I mean, if you know Nuxt, you're probably not going to need the other one, but as you all know, it's kind of nice when someone sets up that config for you, right, with testing and those directors that you know that you're going to need and everything else. We've also talked about how you can handle images and styling assets by the assets directory. And we've shown normal routing, dynamic routing, and routing with slugs, and the fact that it matters how you name your directory and how you name your view components. Remember the underscore. And for layout, we talked about 3 different layouts, which is the default layout, just name it default.view, or error.view for the error page, and well, custom is really call it what you want, but you need to point it out specifically, right? And we talked a bit about async data, and that there are other lifecycle methods that I want you to have a look at once you become real serious about Nuxt, such as fetch and the different kind of middleware. We haven't even talked so much about the fact that the store is in there, the Vuex store, but you can definitely leverage that as well. But I wanted to give you a first look at Nuxt, and hopefully you become inspired to think, oh, this might be something for my next Vue project. It brings stability, is somewhat opinionated, but I don't mind because I'm working at a big company or maybe a small company, and I don't want to spend all that time teaching my colleagues how do you do Nuxt or how do I do Vue. Well, here's a default project structure. Let's keep to that one, right? That's actually all I had to say today. So I believe we have like 1 minute for questions potentially, but thank you very much for being here and listening.